Welcome, everyone, and welcome to the American Folk Heroes podcast. This is where we're going to explore the ideas, convictions, and enduring legacy of the men and women who shaped the American experiment. I'm your host, Austin Revel, here at 2F by C Tactical. The purpose of this podcast moving forward is to remind us of those who came before and what they did and why they remain relevant today. Today, we're going to start with one of the most influential individuals and minds in American history, Thomas Jefferson. He's not only the third president of the United States, but the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, which birthed our Bill of Rights and the Second Amendment that came out of it. So today, we're going to dive into Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson was born April 2nd, 1743, and was a member of the British colonies in Virginia. He was one of 10 children born to the Jefferson family and lived on a plantation early in his childhood. He would be formally educated, as you would see in many of his writings that would come afterwards. And he was someone that put his education at a high regard. Thomas Jefferson was born in April 2nd, 1743, and he was the third out of 10 children to the Jefferson family. His dad was a planter and surveyor, but Jefferson would carve out a different path. He would study under George Wythe, who was a renowned lawyer in the Virginia colonies of the British Empire. This would end up sparking his political career as it would go on. He was a great purveyor of books throughout his lifetime. In fact, he amassed 3 immense libraries in his lifetime. He loved his books, he loved reading, and he loved studying, which, if you look at his first year of college, was not necessarily the case. He was known for partying and kind of squandering away his time at William and Mary in his first semester. But that would change by his second semester, in which he would study 15 hours a day and try to make up for what he looked at as a squandering of his first year at school. After college, he would pursue a career as a lawyer and eventually in the House of Burgesses in Virginia. Now, this is where we would see some of the contradictions of Thomas Jefferson's life. So, for instance, he pursued his brother to help pass legislation that would give the individual owners of slaves the ability to emancipate them themselves, as opposed to having to go to the governors and royals to do so. Now, this is kind of where we start to see in the modern world this retelling of Thomas Jefferson. He was a great believer in the freeing of slaves, even though he owned some himself. And this is where some of the contradictions of the men that founded our country are found. Ones that had great ideals and often pursued them, but sometimes failed to live up to them in many instances themselves. And while that particular piece of legislation would face heavy opposition, it does kind of birth some of the language that we would hear in the Constitution just a few years later. It is in the Second Continental Congress where we really see America take the turn from just suing for representation in Parliament to independence. Quick pause in the video, guys, to give a shout out to our channel sponsor, Patriot Mobile. Now, I've personally been a member of Patriot Mobile for several years now. Everyone is using a cell phone these days. So the question is, why not support someone who supports you, who stands up for the rights that you and I hold dear? And Patriot Mobile puts their money where their mouth is by donating a portion of every dollar they make to the causes that you and I hold dear. They use the same 5G networks that every other major provider uses. You're not sacrificing service. You're supporting a company that will support you. They're going to give our listeners a special discount. Using the code SHALLNOT and clicking the link down below, you will get a free month when you switch to Patriot Mobile. With that, let's get back to the video. Now, yes, a lot of this was spearheaded by John Adams and Massachusetts with Lexington and Concord, which, of course, we will cover these individuals that spearheaded this movement. But Thomas Jefferson, the Virginia man, was the one that they selected to write this all-important document. Because the Declaration of Independence wasn't just the declaring a separation between England and the colonies. It was the set forth of the ideals of why one must do so, the argument why this was important and legal in a lot of ways, and the very foundations that our Constitution would flow out of just a few years later. And this is where we see some of that powerful language that comes from his years of studying, his background as a lawyer, and his tutelage under George Wythe. The language like we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and talks about rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that all men are created equal. And like we said before, while this is not always something that was lived up to by people like Jefferson, it was something that he put out there as a tenet, something that we should aspire to, but something we eventually would rectify with the Civil War and the freeing of the slaves in the 13th Amendment that would be ratified in the 1860s here in the United States. And of course, we'll cover those as well. Now, Thomas Jefferson was very, very firm on individual liberty, and specifically the bearing of arms to maintain that. In some ways, while he didn't directly quote the Second Amendment, he did kind of purvey this throughout his writings. He, for instance, wrote to one of his relatives that let your gun, therefore, be your companion on your walks. He would also talk at great lengths about the consent of the governed being important to the governors. So what do I mean by that? I mean that he was very aware of what tyranny could look like. Now, you got to remember, all these men in this moment had direct firsthand experience with what actual tyranny looked like. The crown oppressing the colonies with taxation, no representation, the quartering of officers and soldiers without any recourse, the stripping of the colonies' rights to sue their government. Even though John Adams, for instance, would defend the perpetrators of the Boston Massacre, rightfully so, and get them acquitted in a court of law here in America, the Crown saw fit to change the rules after that, where no soldier could be tried in America. They have to go back to England. Again, that ability to directly go to one's government was stripped away, which pushed us to this independence. Thomas Jefferson reminds us that freedom is not passive. It demands participation. This is something that he, throughout his life, became very involved in. Whether it was the minister to France, whether it was president of the United States, him and John Adams obviously had a great friendship and a great rivalry, and then came back as friends at the very end. Those ideas, those ideals, I think that we hold here today, especially at 2FYC Tactical. Thomas Jefferson is one of the main reasons why we have them. The Bill of Rights, the stuff that we hold up as the pinnacles of America, which gives you and me the ability to say what we like, to have protections, whether it become from self-incrimination, yes, ownership from other individuals, a la the 13th Amendment, protections in search and seizures, Fourth Amendment rights, and of course the Second Amendment, which is the glue that holds all of this together by giving us a viable way where we can defend ourselves from tyranny. That I'm talking about public defense from our government, and also the enforcement of individual liberties is through the right of people to keep and bear arms. And the reason why we're starting with Thomas Jefferson is we need to remember that these ideals are eternal. And that's why I think we must go back to the beginning, the Declaration of Independence. It says we are endowed by our Creator certain unalienable rights. And it is that phrase that sets up our Bills of Rights, because our Bill of Rights is implying that these are natural law, something that Thomas Jefferson was a great believer in, a purveyor of, which is there are laws that exist outside of government. They are part of nature. And the right of self-defense, of course, is one of them. And because of that, the Bill of Rights is not a granting of rights. It is a constraint on government to touch or change these rights. The consent of the governed would be us amending the Constitution for them to change how they handle these situations. something that has not been done when it comes to the Bill of Rights, for instance. It has been amended to increase things, if you think about the 13th Amendment and other things, but it has not. It has not been shrunk, if you think about that. And that is something that I, I want us, when we go through this series on American folk heroes, to remember. Thomas Jefferson served a great career. He died July 4th, 1826, the 50 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It's one of those things that is poetic. Him and John Adams both passed on the same day. The symmetry there should not be lost on any of us. He got to see this young republic through some very rough times, including the War of 1812 and others, the Whiskey Rebellions and various others. He saw Washington, some of the greats of our founding fathers, and how they handled themselves and how they went about governing this nation. He listened to the edits of Benjamin Franklin and the inputs of others when it came to crafting the Declaration of Independence. And of course, he would govern the United States. He is looked at today as one of our great presidents, rightfully so. Not only because he birthed this nation with his words. His words gave, I should say his written words gave the purpose of this nation. And it's an ideal that we should never forget. And if you haven't read the entire Declaration of Independence, you should go do so. Because the Declaration of Independence could have been a short, hey, England, we're done. This isn't working for us anymore. We would like to separate. It wasn't that. It was a drawn out, like, we understand as Englishmen, because that's what they were, what the purpose of government is supposed to be. We are educated men. We are religious men. We understand that there are certain rights, unalienable rights, that are bound by law of nature that we get to have. And some of that is representation in government. And when those laws are broken, when those laws are squandered, when we are not respected or we're governed without our consent, then it is our mere duty to separate and rectify those issues. And I think this is something that we must remember. When he said that the tree of liberty must be refreshed by the blood of patriots and tyrants, he is talking about that eternal struggle. Government's natural job, or natural disposition, I should say, is to accumulate power and rule over and subdue the governed. America is unique. Thomas Jefferson and others put into place certain constraints on it and gave us the means in which we could fight back if or when, and it's really a matter of when, those elements that sparked this nation become true in our own government. The Constitution is something we should ascribe to follow. It is meant to be the guiding principles and limiting principles on the federal government. But when it comes to those principles and the morals behind it, the Declaration of Independence is what sets that forth. And again, as we go through this series, remember those like Thomas Jefferson and why they did what they did. We have so many great American folk heroes we're going to cover who did great things. And again, these were men with various insecurities and great failures at times that sometimes redeemed themselves in the darkest moments. Does that erase all the sins of the past? No, but it shows that we in America are able to remake ourselves in the future and not be stuck by the decisions of the past. We have great mobility in this country, still to this day, and we're blessed with that fact. I do hope you will like, comment, subscribe, keep tuning in. We're not going to do long, drawn-out documentaries. We're talking about the philosophies and convictions of these individuals, and we'll highlight some of their great accomplishments throughout their lives. Because if we wanted to do a deep dive documentary, some of these men, a lot of these men and women, would take hours to go through. And there's many great documentaries already out there. This is simply a reminder of those who came before us, who set up the principles that we are now required to, and I do mean required, to pick up the torch and continue to fight for, because we have a duty. Our duty is to uphold these principles. Remember the words, we hold these truths to be self-evident, meaning that we know that these things are obvious, but liberty is something that must be fought for. It's something that must be continuously worked for. If we are passive about this, this is where liberty ceases to exist. We have America because there was men like Thomas Jefferson and women like Abigail Adams and others that stood up in times when it was not convenient to do so. And there was great risk to their own personal well-being, wealth, and their very lives. They did it anyway because it was ideals worth standing for. Remember those lessons. And we do look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Have a good one.